The year 1914, a year etched in history, a year that marked the beginning of a conflict so vast, so devastating, it would forever be known as the Great War, World War I. This was a war that shattered empires, redrew maps, and left millions dead in its wake. From the idyllic countryside of France to the snow-swept plains of Russia, the world was engulfed in a conflagration the likes of which had never been seen before. This was a war driven by complex and interconnected causes, a perfect storm of militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. These forces, simmering for decades, finally boiled over in the summer of 1914, plunging the world into an abyss. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, became the spark that ignited the powder keg of Europe. The world watched in horror as the old order crumbled. The great powers of Europe, locked in a deadly embrace, sent millions of their young men to fight and die in the trenches. New technologies of war emerged, transforming battlefields into landscapes of unimaginable carnage. Machine guns, poison gas, and tanks became instruments of death on an industrial scale. The road to war was paved with long-held grievances and ambitions. A web of alliances, forged in the name of security, became a chain reaction waiting to be triggered. The great powers of Europe, each driven by their own agendas, stumbled towards the abyss. One of the most significant factors contributing to the outbreak of war was militarism. Militarism, the belief in the importance of maintaining a strong military force and the willingness to use it aggressively to achieve national goals, had been growing in Europe for decades. Germany, under the leadership of Kaiser Wilhelm II, embarked on a massive naval build-up, challenging Britain's long-standing dominance at sea. This arms race created an atmosphere of suspicion and fear as each nation viewed its neighbours with increasing distrust. Adding fuel to the fire was the rise of nationalism, a powerful force that emphasized national identity, unity, and often superiority. Across Europe, ethnic groups clamored for independence, while existing nations sought to assert their dominance on the world stage. This potent mix of pride and ambition stoked tensions and created a climate ripe for conflict. Nowhere was this more evident than in the Balkans, a region long referred to as the powder keg of Europe. The Ottoman Empire, once a mighty power, was in decline, creating a vacuum that neighboring nations were eager to fill. Serbia, fueled by a desire for a unified Slavic state, clashed with Austria-Hungary, which viewed Serbian nationalism as a direct threat to its territorial integrity. In this volatile environment, a single spark could ignite a continental war. The fateful day arrived on June 28, 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife Sophie were visiting Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia, which Austria-Hungary had annexed in 1908. The annexation had angered Serbian nationalists who viewed Bosnia as part of a future Serbian state. A group of Serbian nationalists known as the Black Hand saw the Archduke's visit as an opportunity to strike a blow against Austro-Hungarian rule. As the Archduke's motorcade made its way through the streets of Sarajevo, a young Bosnian Serb nationalist, Gavrilo Princip, seized his chance. Shots rang out, echoing through the summer air. Franz Ferdinand and Sophie were fatally wounded, their deaths sending shockwaves across Europe. Austria-Hungary, determined to crush Serbian nationalism, saw the assassination as an act of war. Backed by Germany, Austria-Hungary issued an ultimatum to Serbia, a list of demands so harsh they were virtually impossible to accept. Serbia, fearing Austro-Hungarian aggression, appealed to Russia for support. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand set in motion a chain reaction that quickly escalated into a global conflict. The intricate web of alliances that had been woven over the preceding decades transformed a regional crisis into a continental war. Austria-Hungary, with Germany's unwavering support, declared war on Serbia on July 28, 1914. Russia, bound by treaty to protect Serbia, mobilized its massive army. Germany, fearing a two-front war, declared war on Russia on August 1st and on France, Russia's ally, 2 days later. Germany's strategy, known as the Schlieffen Plan, called for a swift knockout blow against France before Russia could fully mobilize its forces. To achieve this, German troops marched through neutral Belgium, violating Belgian neutrality and prompting Britain to declare war on Germany on August 4th. The Central Powers, consisting of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and later the Ottoman Empire and Bulgaria, found themselves pitted against the Allied powers, led by France, Russia, and Great Britain. Italy, initially part of the Triple Alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary, declared neutrality, eventually joining the Allied side in 1915. Japan, honoring its treaty obligations with Great Britain, declared war on Germany on August 23rd. As the armies mobilized, a sense of grim determination settled over Europe. Young men, eager for adventure and imbued with patriotic fervor, flocked to recruiting stations. They had no idea of the horrors that awaited them. This was to be a war unlike any other. A war of attrition fought in trenches that stretched for hundreds of miles. A war that would claim the lives of millions and leave an indelible mark on the 20th century. The Western Front, stretching from the North Sea to the Swiss border, became the primary theatre of war during World War I. Here, both sides dug in, creating a network of trenches that would come to symbolize the brutal and stagnant nature of the conflict. Life in the trenches was grueling and perilous. Soldiers faced constant threats from enemy fire disease and the harsh elements. Despite the danger, camaraderie among the troops provided a sliver of comfort and resilience. Major battles such as the Somme and Verdun epitomized the devastating human cost of trench warfare. These battles resulted in staggering casualties, yet resulted in little territorial gain for either side. The Western Front remained largely unchanged for most of the war, a testament to the deadlock that defined this brutal and unforgiving theatre of conflict. On the Eastern Front, the war was marked by vast, sweeping movements and brutal battles. The Eastern Front saw the clash of empires, with the Russian Empire facing off against the Central Powers. It was a theatre of war that stretched from the Baltic Sea in the north to the Black Sea in the south. The sheer scale of the front and the harsh conditions made it a grueling and deadly conflict. In 1917, the United States entered the war, bringing fresh troops and resources to the beleaguered Allies. The American Expeditionary Forces, led by General John J. Pershing, played a crucial role in turning the tide of the war. Their involvement not only bolstered the morale of the Allied forces, but also provided a significant boost in manpower and material. By 1918, the Central Powers were crumbling under the strain of prolonged conflict. The collapse of the Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires, coupled with internal strife in Germany, led to an armistice on November 11, 1918. The aftermath of the war saw the redrawing of borders, the fall of empires, and the seeds of future conflicts being sown. The legacy of World War I is profound and far-reaching. It reshaped the political landscape of Europe and set the stage for major geopolitical shifts. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, imposed harsh penalties on Germany and sowed the seeds of resentment that would later contribute to World War II. The war also spurred advancements in technology, medicine, and social change, leaving an indelible mark on the 20th century. World War II was a global catastrophe. It raged from 1939 to 1945, engulfing nations across the globe in unprecedented destruction. Millions perished, countless lives were shattered, and the world order was irrevocably transformed. The seeds of this conflict were sown in the aftermath of World War I. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, aimed to ensure lasting peace, but instead sowed resentment and instability. Germany, burdened by reparations and blamed for the war's devastation, became a breeding ground for extremist ideologies. On September 1, 1939, Nazi Germany, led by Adolf Hitler, invaded Poland, triggering a chain reaction that drew Great Britain, France and their allies into a war that would consume the world. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in the aftermath of World War I, cast a long shadow over the world. Intended to prevent future conflicts, it instead became a source of deep resentment and instability. Germany, held responsible for the war's devastation, was subjected to harsh penalties that crippled its economy and fueled national humiliation. The treaty demanded crippling reparations from Germany, stripping it of its industrial heartland and colonies. These punitive measures sowed the seeds of bitterness and resentment among the German population. The humiliation of defeat, coupled with economic hardship, created fertile ground for extremist ideologies to take root. Adding to the instability, the treaty redrew borders across Europe, creating new nations and exacerbating ethnic tensions. As the world grappled with the aftermath of World War I and the Great Depression, a new breed of leader rose to power, the dictator. These leaders capitalized on the chaos and uncertainty, offering simple solutions to complex problems. In Germany, Italy, and Japan, charismatic but ruthless men seized control, promising their people strength, prosperity, and a return to national glory. They manipulated public sentiment and used propaganda to solidify their power. In Germany, Adolf Hitler and his Nazi Party exploited the widespread economic hardship and national humiliation following World War I to gain power. They promised to overturn the Treaty of Versailles and restore Germany's pride. Hitler's venomous rhetoric, laced with anti-Semitism and promises of German dominance, resonated with a population desperate for a strong leader. His speeches stirred nationalistic fervor and a dangerous sense of unity. In Italy, Benito Mussolini founded the Fascist Party, promising to restore Italy to its former glory as the Roman Empire. He used symbols of ancient Rome to inspire and rally the masses. In Japan, military leaders, driven by expansionist ambitions and a belief in Japanese racial superiority, gained increasing influence. They sought to expand Japan's territory and power in Asia. These dictators, driven by their own ambitions and ideologies, would forge an alliance of convenience, the Axis powers, united in their desire for conquest and disdain for democracy. Their actions would plunge the world into another devastating conflict. The dogs of war were unleashed on September 1st, 1939, when Nazi Germany invaded Poland, marking the beginning of a global conflict that would change the course of history. This act of aggression shattered the fragile peace, triggering a chain reaction that would draw nations across the globe into a conflict of unprecedented scale and devastation, engulfing continents and affecting millions of lives. Poland, caught in the grip of Hitler's blitzkrieg, fought valiantly but was quickly overrun by the relentless and highly coordinated German forces. Great Britain and France, honoring their commitments to Poland, declared war on Germany on September 3, 1939, setting the stage for a prolonged and brutal conflict. However, the initial months of the war, known as the Phony War, saw little action on the Western Front as both sides prepared for the battles to come. In the spring of 1940, Hitler unleashed his blitzkrieg on Western Europe, a lightning-fast campaign that overwhelmed defenses and led to swift victories. Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and finally France fell in rapid succession, each country succumbing to the might of the German war machine. The Battle of Britain, a pivotal moment in the war, raged in the skies over England during the summer and fall of 1940. As the RAF defended their homeland against relentless Luftwaffe attacks. The RAF, aided by radar and the courage of its pilots, fought back with unwavering determination, ultimately breaking the back of the Luftwaffe and securing a crucial victory. In June 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, a massive invasion of the Soviet Union, opening up the Eastern Front and further expanding the scope of the war. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, drawing the United States into World War II and marking a significant turning point in the global conflict. Section 5, A Turning Tide, the Allies find their footing. The early years of World War II were marked by Axis victories, their relentless offensives seemingly unstoppable. However, the tide began to turn in 1942 and 1943 as the Allies, bolstered by American industrial might and Soviet resilience, began to gain the upper hand. The Battle of Midway, fought in June 1942, marked a turning point in the Pacific War. The United States Navy, deciphering Japanese codes, ambushed and decisively defeated the Japanese fleet. In the Eastern Front, the Battle of Stalingrad, a brutal, months-long struggle, raged from August 1942 to February 1943. The Soviet Red Army, fighting with unwavering ferocity, defended the city street by street. inflicting staggering losses on the German invaders. The German defeat at Stalingrad marked a turning point in the war, shattering the myth of German invincibility and putting the Wehrmacht on the defensive. Section 6, The Price of Victory, A World in Ruins. Victory in World War II came at a staggering cost. Millions lay dead, victims of unimaginable brutality and the horrors of modern warfare. Cities lay in ruins, their once bustling streets reduced to rubble. The global economy, shattered by years of conflict, struggled to recover. An estimated 70 to 85 million people perished, including soldiers and civilians caught in the crossfire. The Soviet Union alone suffered an estimated 27 million casualties. The Holocaust, the systematic state-sponsored persecution and murder of 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime, stands as a chilling reminder of the depths of human depravity. Jews were rounded up, deported to concentration camps, and systematically murdered in gas chambers or worked to death. The war's economic toll was equally devastating, with destroyed factories, railroads, and infrastructure across Europe and Asia. Section 7. From the ashes, the dawn of a new era. As the dust settled on a war-torn world, a new era dawned, one shaped by the profound consequences of the conflict. The old order, shattered by years of fighting, gave way to a new balance of power, with the United States and the Soviet Union emerging as superpowers. The United Nations, founded in 1945, embodied the hopes of a world weary of war. Its charter, signed by 50 nations, aimed to prevent future conflicts, promote international cooperation, and uphold human rights. The UN, though imperfect, would play a vital role in shaping the post-war world. The war also accelerated the process of decolonization, with European powers finding it increasingly difficult to maintain their overseas empires. Section 8. The Cold War, a world divided. The wartime alliance between the United States and the Soviet Union, forged in the crucible of conflict, proved to be short-lived. As the shadow of war receded, the ideological divide between the capitalist West and the communist East widened, leading to a decades-long rivalry known as the Cold War. The Cold War, a global struggle for hearts and minds, was fought not on traditional battlefields but through propaganda, espionage, proxy wars, and the constant threat of nuclear annihilation. The United States and its allies, committed to containing the spread of communism, faced off against the Soviet Union and its satellite states. The Cold War cast a long shadow over the post-war world, shaping global politics, economics, and culture. Section 9. The Enduring Legacy, World War II's Impact on the World. World War II, the deadliest conflict in human history, left an enduring legacy, shaping the world we live in today. The war's devastation and the immense loss of life had far-reaching consequences that are still felt across the globe. Its impact can be seen in the geopolitical landscape, the rise of international institutions, technological advancements, and the collective memory of a generation that witnessed unimaginable horrors. The war's influence extends to various aspects of modern society, including politics, technology, and culture. The war reshaped the global balance of power, leading to the emergence of the United States and the Soviet Union as superpowers. This new world order set the stage for the Cold War, a period of intense rivalry and competition between these two nations. It also paved the way for the decline of European colonialism and the rise of new nations in Asia and Africa. The struggle for independence and self-determination gained momentum, leading to significant political and social changes in these regions. The conflict led to the creation of the United Nations, an international organization dedicated to preventing future wars and promoting global cooperation. The UN has since played a crucial role in maintaining peace and addressing global issues. It also spurred the development of new technologies, including jet aircraft, computers, and nuclear weapons, which would have profound implications for the future. These innovations revolutionized warfare, communication, and industry, shaping the modern world. The lessons of World War II, though painful, are essential for future generations, reminding us of the dangers of unchecked nationalism and the importance of international cooperation. By studying this period, we can better understand the complexities of our world and work towards a more peaceful future. A nation forever marked the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The world watched in horror as the mushroom clouds rose above Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. These unprecedented acts of atomic warfare brought World War II to a close but left an indelible mark on Japan. On August 6th, the little boy bomb detonated over Hiroshima. The city was instantly engulfed in a blinding flash of light and searing heat. Shockwaves rippled outwards, leveling buildings and igniting fires. Thousands perished in an instant. 3 days later, Nagasaki faced a similar fate as the Fat Man bomb rained destruction upon its streets. The immediate aftermath was one of unimaginable devastation. The two cities lay in ruins, their streets littered with debris and the bodies of the dead. Survivors emerged from the rubble, many bearing horrific burns and injuries. The full extent of the devastation gradually unfolded as the world grappled with the terrifying power of the atomic bomb. The bombings claimed the lives of an estimated 210,000 people by the end of 1945. Countless others would succumb to radiation sickness and long-term health complications in the years that followed. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki marked a turning point in human history. They ushered in the nuclear age and cast a long shadow over international relations. For Japan, the bombings were a national tragedy of unimaginable proportions, forever shaping the country's identity and future. They served as a stark reminder of the horrors of war and the urgent need for peace. The bombings had a profound and lasting impact on Japanese society, leading to a deep-seated aversion to war and a commitment to pacifism. This experience would come to define Japan's post-war identity and its role on the world stage. The long shadow of war, societal impacts and the hibakusha. The atomic bombings had a profound and lasting impact on Japanese society. The physical and psychological scars of the bombings ran deep, shaping the nation's psyche for generations to come. The survivors, known as hibakusha, bore the brunt of the atomic attacks. They faced not only the immediate trauma of the bombings, but also the long-term health consequences of radiation exposure. Many suffered from leukemia, cancer, and other illnesses. The hibakusha faced discrimination and prejudice in post-war Japan. Many were ostracized from their communities due to fears of radiation contamination. They struggled to find employment and marriage partners. Their children also faced prejudice, often labeled as hibakusha children and subject to bullying and social isolation. Despite these challenges, the hibakusha became powerful advocates for peace and nuclear disarmament. They shared their stories of survival and loss with the world, bearing witness to the horrors of nuclear war. Their testimonies served as a stark reminder of the human cost of atomic weapons and the urgent need for their elimination. The experiences of the hibakusha had a profound impact on Japanese society, shaping public opinion against nuclear weapons and war. Their stories continue to resonate today, serving as a powerful call for peace and reconciliation. Embracing Peace, Japan's pacifist constitution, and Article 9. In the aftermath of World War II, Japan embarked on a path of rebuilding and reconciliation. A key element of this transformation was the adoption of a new constitution in 1947. This document, drafted under the Allied occupation, enshrined pacifism as a core principle of Japanese society. At the heart of Japan's pacifist constitution lies Article 9. This landmark article renounces war as a sovereign right of the nation and forbids the maintenance of war potential. It states that the Japanese people forever renounce war as a sovereign right of the nation and the threat or use of force as means of settling international disputes. Article 9 has been the subject of much debate and interpretation over the years. Some argue that it prevents Japan from possessing any military force, while others contend that it allows for a self-defense force to protect the nation from attack. Despite these debates, Article 9 remains a cornerstone of Japan's post-war identity. It reflects the nation's deep-seated aversion to war and its commitment to resolving international disputes through peaceful means. Section 4, the U.S. Nuclear Umbrella, a complex security arrangement. While Japan adopted a pacifist constitution, it also faced a complex security environment in the post-war era. The rise of the Soviet Union and the Cold War led Japan to forge a close security alliance with the United States. This alliance, formalized in the 1951 Security Treaty, provided Japan with a security guarantee from the US in the event of an attack. A key element of this security arrangement is the US nuclear umbrella. This means that the United States, as a nuclear-armed state, would come to Japan's defense if it were attacked by a nuclear-armed adversary. The nuclear umbrella allowed Japan to maintain its non-nuclear policy while still feeling secure under the protection of a powerful ally. However, the US nuclear umbrella has also been a source of controversy in Japan. Some argue that it makes Japan a target in a potential nuclear conflict, while others contend that it is essential for deterring aggression. The debate over the nuclear umbrella reflects the complex balance Japan must strike between its pacifist principles and its security concerns. Section 5. Navigating the nuclear landscape, Japan's post-war policy. Japan's experience with nuclear weapons has profoundly shaped its post-war security policy. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki left an indelible mark on the nation's psyche, fueling a deep-seated aversion to nuclear weapons and a commitment to their abolition. In 1967, Japan formally adopted the 3 non-nuclear principles, which state that Japan shall not possess, produce, or permit the introduction of nuclear weapons into its territory. These principles have served as the cornerstone of Japan's nuclear policy for decades, reflecting the nation's unwavering commitment to a world free of nuclear weapons. Despite its strong anti-nuclear stance, Japan has maintained a complex relationship with nuclear energy. After World War II, Japan embraced nuclear power as a means of achieving energy independence and economic growth. The country developed a robust civilian nuclear industry, constructing numerous nuclear power plants across the archipelago. Japan's nuclear policy has been a balancing act between its commitment to non-proliferation and its reliance on the US nuclear umbrella. The country has consistently advocated for nuclear disarmament while simultaneously benefiting from the security guarantees provided by its alliance with the United States. Look, no one wants to talk about World War III. It's terrifying, it's depressing. And frankly, who has the time when you're trying to remember your own Netflix password? But the truth is, the world today is starting to feel a bit like a roommate who's left the stove on while simultaneously arguing with their significant other on the phone, and also the entire apartment is filled with gasoline. In other words, things aren't looking great. And while I'm not saying we're on the brink of global thermonuclear war, I'm saying that there are some worrying parallels to past conflicts that we'd be foolish to ignore. All right, let's talk about the big boys on the block, the US, China, and Russia. They're like the 3 richest kids in school, except instead of vying for prom king, they're competing for global dominance. And just like those kids who peaked in high school, they're not afraid to throw their weight around. We're talking military exercises that look a lot like dress rehearsals for war, aggressive posturing over disputed territories, and enough nuclear weapons to turn the planet into a radioactive wasteland. Now, I'm not saying that any of these countries actually are war, but the problem is sometimes all it takes is a miscalculation, a misunderstanding, or one overly caffeinated general to push things over the edge. Remember the Cuban Missile Crisis? Yeah, exactly. And let's not forget about the smaller players who could get caught in the crossfire. Imagine a regional conflict, say in the South China Sea, spiraling out of control and dragging the big guns into the fray. Suddenly, we're not talking about a localized skirmish anymore. We're talking about a global conflagration. Look, the world is a complicated place, and international relations are about as straightforward as a game of 4-dimensional chess played on a trampoline during an earthquake. Let's be honest, folks, nuclear weapons are terrifying. They are the ultimate oh shit button, capable of wiping out entire cities in the blink of an eye. And yet, here we are, sitting on enough nuclear firepower to turn the planet into a smouldering cinder block multiple times over. Now, you might be thinking, but John, surely no one would be stupid enough to actually those things, right? And to that I say, have you humanity? We're the species that invented the spork, the selfie stick and Crocs. We're not exactly known for our rational decision-making. The real danger lies in something called nuclear brinkmanship. It's a bit like playing chicken with a semi-truck, except the semi-truck is carrying enough plutonium to give the entire planet cancer. The idea is to scare your opponent into backing down by making them think you're crazy enough to push the button. The problem is, sometimes that bluff goes horribly wrong, and then we all get to experience the joys of nuclear winter. Look, I'm not a military strategist, I'm a comedian with a YouTube channel. But even I can see that relying on mutually assured destruction to keep the peace is about as sensible as building a house of cards out of dynamite. Alright, let's talk about proxy wars, the geopolitical equivalent of passive-aggressive Facebook posts. Instead of fighting each other directly, larger powers back different sides in smaller conflicts, fueling the flames of war while technically keeping their hands clean. It's like starting a bar fight by anonymously sending insulting text messages from someone else's phone, except instead of bar stools and beer bottles, we're talking about tanks, missiles, and the very real human cost of war. And where are these proxy wars happening? Oh, just in some of the most volatile regions on the planet, the Middle East, Africa, Eastern Europe. Places already grappling with poverty, instability, and enough historical baggage to fill a cargo ship. Now, the problem with proxy wars is that they rarely stay contained. One minute you're arming a rebel group in some far-flung corner of the globe, the next minute you're staring down the barrel of a full-blown international crisis. It's like trying to put out a campfire with gasoline. You might think you're in control, but things can escalate very, very quickly. And let's not forget about the human cost. While the big powers play their geopolitical chess games, it's the people caught in the middle who pay the price. They're the ones forced to flee their homes, the ones who lose loved ones, the ones left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Proxy wars might seem like someone else's problem, but the reality is they're a powder keg waiting to explode, and we're all standing too close to the blast radius. Now, let's talk about a different kind of warfare. The kind fought not with bullets and bombs, but with tariffs, sanctions, and good old-fashioned economic pressure. It might not be as flashy as tanks rolling across borders or fighter jets screaming through the sky, but trust me, it can be just as devastating. Think of it like this. Imagine your roommate refusing to do the dishes, so you decide to punish them by eating all their food, using their Netflix password to watch terrible reality TV, and blasting polka music at all hours of the night. Annoying, right? Well, that's basically economic warfare in a nutshell. Now, in the real world, it's a bit more complicated than that. We're talking about countries slapping tariffs on each other's goods, freezing assets, and generally trying to cripple each other's economies. The goal to force your opponent to their knees without firing a single shot. And while it might seem like a more civilized way to fight, the reality is economic warfare can be just as brutal as a military conflict, especially for ordinary citizens who suddenly find themselves struggling to afford basic necessities. And here's the kicker: economic warfare can actually increase the risk of actual war. Okay, picture this. Millions of people fleeing war, persecution, or climate disaster, all searching for a safe haven, a place to rebuild their shattered lives. Now imagine that wave of humanity crashing against the borders of countries already struggling with their own problems. It's a recipe for tension, instability, and, you guessed it, more conflict. We've seen it time and time again throughout history. The mass movement of refugees can strain resources, inflame xenophobia, and become a political football kicked around by cynical leaders eager to exploit fear and division for their own gain. And it's not just about physical resources either. It's about cultural identity, national security, and the very idea of what it means to belong. These are complex issues with no easy answers, but one thing's for sure: ignoring the plight of refugees, or worse, demonizing them, only makes the situation more volatile. Because here's the thing: desperate people do desperate things. When you deny someone's safety, security, and a future, you create a breeding ground for extremism, resentment, and, yes, even more conflict. It's like ignoring a small crack in a dam. Eventually the pressure builds and the whole thing bursts, flooding everything in its path. We need to find a better way to manage refugee crises, a way that's both humane and sustainable. All right, folks, buckle up because we're about to enter the Matrix, or at least the part of the Matrix where wars are fought not with guns and bombs, but with ones and zeros. That's right, we're talking about cyber warfare, the silent battlefield, where the next global conflict could very well begin with the click of a mouse. Now, forget about your stereotypical image of a hacker in a hoodie hunched over a glowing screen in their mum's basement. We're talking about sophisticated state-sponsored actors with the ability to cripple critical infrastructure, disrupt economies, and even sow chaos and discord on a massive scale. Imagine waking up one morning to find the power grid down, banks offline, and the internet replaced with a flashing error message. No more cat videos, no more online shopping, no more doom scrolling through social media. Suddenly, the world we take for granted grinds to a halt. And here's the really scary part. In the digital realm, it can be incredibly difficult to determine the source of an attack. Was it a rogue nation-state, a terrorist organization, a disgruntled teenager with a grudge and a really fast internet connection? It's like trying to solve a murder mystery where the only evidence is a series of cryptic emails and the faint smell of Mountain Dew and Doritos. This ambiguity makes cyber warfare incredibly dangerous because it increases the risk of miscalculation and escalation. All right, let's talk about a trend that's been rearing its ugly head in recent years, the rise of nationalism and authoritarianism. We're seeing it all over the world. Strongmen leaders promising to restore their nations to some mythical former glory by demonizing outsiders, eroding democratic institutions, and generally behaving like they just binge-watched every season of House of Cards back-to-back. Now, I know what you're thinking. John, surely a little bit of nationalism is harmless, right? It's just people being proud of their country. And to that I say, sure, a healthy dose of national pride can be a good thing. It's what makes the Olympics bearable, for example. But when nationalism morphs into an all-consuming ideology, when it's used to justify discrimination, oppression, and aggression, that's when things get dangerous. Because here's the thing about authoritarian leaders. They crave power above all else. They see the world as a zero-sum game, where any gain for someone else is a loss for them. And they're not afraid to use force, intimidation, or outright violence to get what they want. Now imagine a world where more and more countries are led by these kinds of strongmen, each one convinced that they're the only ones who can save their nation from some perceived threat. It's a world where diplomacy goes out the window, where international cooperation collapses, and where the risk of conflict skyrockets. All right, folks, let's talk about something that's both terrifying and incredibly profitable: the global arms trade. We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry that thrives on conflict, an industry that's more than happy to supply both sides of a war with the tools they need to kill each other more efficiently. And business, my friends, is booming. Countries around the world are engaged in a massive military build-up, stockpiling weapons, developing new and terrifying technologies, and generally behaving like they're preparing for a particularly intense game of laser tag, except with real lasers and real consequences. Now, you might be thinking, but John, isn't it a good thing for countries to have strong militaries? Doesn't it deter aggression? And to that, I say, sure, in a perfect world, a strong military would be a deterrent, but we don't live in a perfect world. We live in a world where countries are led by flawed human beings, where miscalculations happen, and where sometimes having a really big hammer makes everything look like a nail. The problem with military build-ups is that they create a climate of fear and suspicion. When one country ramps up its military spending, its neighbors feel compelled to do the same. And suddenly, you're caught in a spiral of escalation that's very difficult to escape. It's like being at a dinner party where everyone keeps ordering more and more food, even though they're already stuffed, just because they don't want to be the first one to stop. Okay, let's talk about the United Nations, that grand experiment in international cooperation, that shining beacon of hope in a world often defined by conflict and division. It's like the well-meaning but slightly dysfunctional family reunion of global politics where everyone shows up, eats too much potato salad, and tries their best to avoid talking about the elephant in the room, which in this case is usually a war, a genocide, or some other horrific humanitarian crisis. Now, I know what you're thinking. John, surely you're not suggesting that the UN is useless, are you? And to that I say, look, the UN is like a Swiss Army knife that's been run over by a tank. It's got all these great tools for diplomacy, peacekeeping, and humanitarian aid, but they're often broken, outdated, or completely ineffective. The problem is the UN is only as strong as its member states allow it to be. And let's be honest, folks, the world's superpowers aren't exactly known for their willingness to play by the rules, especially when those rules get in the way of their own self-interest. It's like trying to referee a soccer match where the players are allowed to bribe the ref, ignore the rules, and occasionally just punch each other in the face. All right, folks, let's talk about the biggest threat facing humanity: climate change. No, I'm not talking about whether or not you should feel guilty for enjoying the occasional plastic straw. I'm talking about the existential crisis that's already fueling conflicts around the world and has the potential to make World War III look like a playground squabble. Here's the deal. As the planet warms, resources like water, food, and arable land are becoming increasingly scarce. And when people are desperate, when they're struggling to survive, they're more likely to resort to violence to secure what they need. It's like being trapped in a lifeboat with a dwindling supply of fresh water and a bunch of people who haven't seen a good meal in weeks. Things are going to get ugly fast. We're already seeing this play out in regions like the Middle East and Africa, where droughts and desertification are exacerbating existing conflicts and displacing millions of people. And as the effects of climate change intensify, these conflicts are only going to become more frequent and more brutal. Now imagine a world where entire nations are struggling to survive, where mass migrations become the norm, and where the battle for resources becomes a matter of life and death. Okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather the suicide bomber in the chat-room extremism. It's a complex issue, often fueled by poverty, inequality, and a whole lot of really bad ideology. And it has a nasty habit of turning already volatile situations into full-blown infernos. Think of extremism as the unstable, highly reactive element in the global powder keg. It only takes a small spark, a perceived injustice, a provocative act, a charismatic leader with a dangerous message to ignite a conflagration. Now, terrorism, that's extremism's brutal calling card. It's violence designed to instill fear, to sow chaos, and to provoke a reaction. And sadly, it's often tragically effective. Because here's the thing. Terrorist attacks don't just claim lives, they also shred the fabric of society. They erode trust, fuel paranoia, and create a climate of fear where it's all too easy for governments to justify draconian measures in the name of security. And here's where things get really dangerous when major powers get involved. Suddenly, what might have been a local conflict can escalate into a global war on terror, with devastating consequences for everyone involved. We've seen this movie before, folks, and it doesn't have a happy ending. The fight against extremism is important, but it's a fight that must be waged with intelligence, compassion, and a commitment to addressing the root causes of radicalization. So there you have it, folks. A whirlwind tour of all the ways the world could end up looking like a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Cheery stuff, right? But look, I'm not telling you all this to depress you or to send you running for the nearest underground bunker. The future isn't written yet, and we all have a role to play in shaping it. The first step is awareness. We need to understand the challenges we face, the interconnected nature of our world, and the very real consequences of inaction. We need to be informed, engaged citizens, demanding better from our leaders and holding them accountable for their decisions. But most importantly, we need to remember our shared humanity. We need to reject the forces of division and hatred that seek to turn us against each other. We need to build bridges of understanding, to embrace compassion and empathy, and to work together to create a more just, equitable, and peaceful world.